My name is Blake Johnson. Thank you for coming out today. We really appreciate you coming and being here, and we hope to share some very useful information.
And I'm, as I mentioned, Scott Kowalewski. I'm a faculty member in the Professional Writing Department, where I also co-direct the Center for Experience Research and Design, which is through that role where a lot of the work that I'll share today came from. And then another half where on campus series, the University Writing Program Administrator.
And I'm Bill Williamson, also in writer and professional writing, and usability scholar, usability researcher, and I'll be setting the stage for us today with some insights into what we're doing and why we're doing this. So there are a couple themes that overarch our work here. Connection and authenticity. And that's really what we want to be able to explore here today is we got a new group of students coming through that represent some changing attitudes, that represent some changing demographics and dynamics, and how do we connect with those people. One of the ways that we do it is through authentic experience, through authenticity, and we'll explore what we mean by that. And as it says there, the trait that we would argue is most significant about the students that are coming to us now is that craving for or that engagement through authenticity. And so one of our goals is to explore what that means in terms of university life and across the board in terms of university life. We've got people here who represent areas other than faculty. And that's a reminder, and I'll echo what Provost Huntley said right at the beginning. Our primary mission is education. That's what this incoming generation of students really thinks of as our mission, is education. In our daily lives, we sometimes lose track of that as the bigger purpose or the bigger connection. And so what we're going to ask you to do today is to think about how, no matter what your role or responsibility is with the university, how do you connect with that mission of education? So why? Why do we feel a need to connect? In part because, well, we labeled them already, Generation Z. With labels come misconceptions and miscommunications. They come in with a misguided sense of who we are, what we do. Oh, you only have to teach 3 classes? You only have to teach 4 classes? Your life must be really easy. They don't have a sense of everything that we do. Or they come to your office, all you have to do is fiddle with the computer and make it so that I can get into a class. Your job must be really easy. Those misconceptions define in very negative ways what happens and what doesn't happen within the university. But guess what? We have misconceptions of them as well. What are they capable of? What are they not capable of? What are their attitudes? What are their values? How often do we hear somebody talking about their lack of values? How offended would they be if they heard us communicating about them in that light? So each group of stakeholders, and we want to really emphasize it as stakeholders, parents, professors, administrators, students, all of us who are professionals within the university, we all have a responsibility to help create that connection, and we all have a responsibility in terms of what we're talking about here today to reflect upon what it means to have authentic connections and to think about what it means to generate meaningful, lasting relationships with these people who are coming through the doors. Part of this is spurred by work that we were hired by the university to do starting last summer. Starting to think about the website. What do we do with the website to improve upon it? We engaged in a multi-stage usability study that put us in front of experts in web design, that put us in front of high school students, that put us in front of college students, transfers, colleagues from other institutions, thinking about how we interact with things like websites. So although that was our entry point into it, what we learned from it is really broad-based and really far-reaching. And so we'll walk through some different data and some different sets of expectations that come from that. So, Generation Z, do we want to use that label? I hesitate with that kind of stuff. Like I said, too much of what we do is about labeling people. And those labels bring with them misconceptions. So we'll shift it and say Generation Next. Much more ambiguous. No, is it more ambiguous? I don't know. We always think we know what's defined in those labels. So thinking about what's going on here though, how do we make this more concrete? So what our work as usability researchers does, and as collectively we are part of Cardinal Solutions and part of the usability research team, we are reminded on a daily basis with that work that we deal with individuals, that we deal with people who have real problems that are unique to them, real expectations that are unique to them, and there are patterns certainly that emerge from that, from interacting with those people, but they're patterns. We can't use them as a baseline assumption for how we interact with everybody. And even when we work face-to-face with people, sometimes it's easy to forget once they walk away that they're still individuals. And we want to continuously remind ourselves that we serve individuals who come to us as a collective. How do we do that? It says that the real challenge is to act on our growing knowledge of needs and awareness of expectations that students bring with them. And one component of successful action is depending on our ability as a university, as departments, offices, individual professionals, to rethink how we connect with our stakeholders, with all of those people, and each other when it comes down to it. And so creating some strategy around that is really what we're talking about doing today. So thinking in terms of that in a more concrete way, there are three interconnected elements to what we're doing. Examining what we know, talking about what it means to engage in authentic action, and then creating an action plan for how we move forward. How do we connect? How do we engage? How do we sustain it? We'll talk about authentic action. Easiest way for me to define that is in terms of my own work, personally. So in my classes, I connect students with real clients, with service learning opportunities. I have them doing original research where they are connecting with the people who use the information products that they designed, or with information products maybe that other people have designed and that they are testing. So they are learning how to treat individuals as individuals, how to help those people succeed by learning what their needs and expectations are, and then learning how to translate that into real communication strategy. Put it in the context of somebody like career services, however. When they are engaging in those items that are listed here, job fairs, mock interviews, those sessions where they talk about or demonstrate business etiquette, those are authentic experiences. So what we want to call attention to here is that the authentic experience, it's stuff that you're already doing most likely. It's stuff that you could be celebrating very specifically. We talked about heading off problems. A lot of the theme in the last conversation was about addressing students who are in crisis and who are struggling, identifying who they might be, and then helping them figure out what's going on. When we build these kinds of things into our experiences across the board throughout the university, we anticipate those problems in advance before they have a chance to become problems. By engaging them in the first place, hopefully we put less burden on the people who are tasked with the idea or the reality of crisis management. That's you. So let me come back to this really quickly then. Authentic experiences have tangible outcomes. And the best moments that we're talking about, like it says there, spark lingering reflection. Hey, that was a really cool thing. The more that an activity comes to mind for an individual student, the more that they talk about it with their peers in class, those are moments that we want to hold on to, that we as educators, that we as professionals across the university want to remind ourselves of so that we can remind our students of and our other stakeholders of. Because when we challenge participants to think in those ways, we are contributing to their professional development. And across the board, no one of us can do our jobs alone. I can't do my job without admissions, without career services, without financial aid, without the library, without my teaching peers. And knowing that and being reminded of that, obviously I can't do my job without my students showing up as well, right? So if I can't keep them engaged, if I can't give them a sense of what it means to have a return on investment that's meaningful and valuable to them, as well as to me, trying to build that common ground, I'm going to fail as an educator. Or at least I'm not going to succeed as much as I would want to as an educator. So as we begin moving ahead, let me ask really quickly, what authentic experiences can you think of in your world? Any of you, faculty, administrators, professionals working in offices? Yes, sir.
John Days, like history, we want to make people, students see historical events through the eyes of the people who participated. That starts with simply reading their accounts, but you can expand on that to things like role play. For example, when I teach World War II, and then we come to the end of World War II, I say, okay, we are now at the Yalta Conference, you are the British, you are the Russians, you are the Americans, what do you want? What are you going to offer the other side? Just imagine it.
Yeah, there you go.
Poland, how much is Poland worth to you, right?
That's right, that's right. Somebody else, another example, from somewhere across the university, doesn't matter where. Might recall on somebody, I could do that teacher.
Well, in our office, we have, particularly the Office of Undergraduate Admissions, at our office, we have student tour guides called RED program, where they get great experience in their public speaking, but also working with families and clients. And we see that many of our tour guides go off in their professional life and now have that professional speaking component, relationship building with people who are not known to them coming into the situation. And that's
Absolutely.
really helping.
I was a campus tour guide at Michigan Tech, actually got to the point where I ran the tour center for them when I was a graduate student. I still talk about it in my classes. Why? Because that experience was meaningful to my experience at Michigan Tech, but it also became some of the foundation for my life and my abilities even as a teacher, was being in that role. Yeah.
So I think one of the most important aspects of my job is to promote a culture of student success, and I think I'm sitting in the middle of it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't get more authentic than that. Okay, so that gives you a sense of the baseline of what we're talking about. What Scott's going to do is he's going to take us down the road into looking at some of the data, some of the specific things that we learned about Generation Z, whatever we want to call them, the students coming through the door. That's really what we need to call it. Go for it, sir.
So as Bill mentioned earlier, this project really started with a really great opportunity to look at the ways that the university website engages and attracts prospective students, how those students find information on particular majors and programs of interest, and to maybe a lesser extent, but also equally important, how they sort of think about the sense of community that the website, the presence of the web, speaks about the actual physical community and how they might be welcomed here. And so we had the opportunity to work through a dozen different methods of research and data gathering, and we worked with scores of students, prospective students. So this sort of really ran the gamut from high school students to transfer students, both current and former, prospective. And so we got voices and stories from a lot of different places about what was important to them and how they felt their experiences, what they were looking for. As Bill mentioned, things that they, what do they value in particular about a potential college or university experience. And so, as researchers, as those who work in web design in particular, and creating spaces of information on the web, we often enter these spaces making a lot of assumptions about what we think students might want or what we think students might know. And some of these are dead on, and some of these are completely wrong. But what we wanted to do was kind of get a sense, at least initially, both what were some of our assumptions, but then sort of fill those gaps in with what's actually happening. And so one of the ways we do that is sort of the stakeholder analysis chart, where we map out our primary, our secondary, and tertiary audiences. For the purpose of today, we'll focus on primary audiences, who are prospective students. They are the action takers. They are the ones that we want to look at a place like SVSU and say, yes, this is where I belong, this is where I want to come, this is where I feel welcome and where I can find a program of study that interests me and impacts me and challenges me. And we want to think then, what are their needs? So what kinds of questions and problems do they come to a website looking to answer, and how well or not so well does our site and our programs and the ways that we tell the stories about what we do here, how well do they address those needs? Similarly, what kinds of things do they value? Value about their education, value about their experience and what they're looking for in a college or university. And then what are their attitudes towards us, towards each other, towards other universities. So, just kind of maybe off the top of your head, spitball a little bit, what do we think are some of the needs, values, and attitudes of sort of this generation next, or these prospective students who are looking to matriculate at a place like SVSU in the next couple of years? Yeah, Andrew.
The primary level need would be just the fact that we offer 4-year degrees.
Do we have 4-year degrees? Sure. Yeah. What are the things that they're looking for when they're considering university?
What is the value of that degree? What will happen once they graduate?
Well,
What is the ROI,
yeah.
return on investment?
Right. What kind of job prospects?
I would say that they also want to have a sense of, like, are they going to have fun here? Or what part do they play in that environment?
Right. Activities, extracurricular, clubs, organizations, opportunities to do things within campus living. Yeah. What else? Yeah, John.
Especially for students, and that's generalization we're generalizing about, in Michigan, the sense of diversity, multicultural experience, just to see that there's a whole big wide world out there that's beyond.
Right. Are there going to be opportunities to meet diverse cultures and people different from where I grew up and how these experiences shape who I am and where I go and what I learn? We'll go Nick and then others.
Well, because they're so interested in the ROI and the value, how are you going to get me from point A to point B? Like, what is the layout? What do I need to do in order to graduate, in order to have the experiences, in order to get the job once I graduate?
It's great that you can get me from point A to point B, but if I can't afford it,
What's it going to cost? Exactly.
I think like this prospect of building connections with other peers, perhaps with people that are like as well as advising.
I think for a number of students, I know my experience, it's what I would call the reset button. And I found that very liberating, to get away from the high school, to get away from my failures or my record, whatever it is, it's a reset button. I'm starting from scratch, in a sense. And I think that for some of our students anyway, that's a really important.
Get that fresh start, right? So
yeah,
high school's
really
behind me.
time.
I've got the 4 years, 5 years of university life ahead of me. What would it look like? You guys are pretty good because, right, we look at then the survey data. So we surveyed dozens of incoming youth. So this is particularly from prospective high school students. The top thing they look for when considering a university or college, do they have the academic major and minor that I'm interested in? Followed closely by, what's it going to cost and can I get some funding to help support it? We can kind of see how things rank down. I like to point out, right, faculty. We're right above sports. They do have a spot in the park to get the class, but it doesn't matter who's teaching that class. Right.
Perspective, everybody.
So, right, it's sort of this eye-opening moment to say, right, and we're not surprised, a lot of you have mentioned other things that involve being part of a campus community, living facilities, extracurricular activities, campus safety, right, was a kind of right in the middle there, something being fairly important. And it's eye-opening too because, we went in, as many of you, as we just were chatting with particular assumptions about what they might be interested in, what they might value, and how they might approach this experience and what they're looking for. One of the things I think really jumped out that we were not expecting was this sort of, the sort of academic thing when we organize and structure information on, about our programs. And again, I'm talking about the web in particular here, but we do it other places as well. Students have a tough time distinguishing the difference between undergraduate and graduate experiences. To them, when we ask them during a a trail map. We wanted them to sort of map how they came about and found a particular program, and so they sort of mapped this with screenshots and stuff. When we asked them to do that activity, many of them started by looking at graduate programs, because in their mind they were high school graduates. Right? And they did not recognize necessarily the difference in what we call and what we consider graduate versus undergraduate experience. And so it was this really important moment for us to say, how we label and talk about things needs to be able to map with the way that prospective students are thinking about these things as well. When we sort of blow up that top interest in terms of academic major and minor, now we asked, again in the same survey, what are the most important factors then when choosing a major? Look at the top three. All very practically focused. Job placement, internships, what kinds of labs and facilities where I can get some hands-on experience. Right? Is the university or the program going to have? And y'all, faculty. Again, we're just above peer support. Well, clubs and organizations, right. So, the things that this generation values are those practical level experiences. I'm happy to see rigor kind of was up there as well. They want to be challenged, but they recognize that they expect the value of experience not to necessarily be sitting passively in the classroom, but to be actively engaged in projects and research and activities. So we want to think then about how this maps to the ways that we tell our stories and the ways that we share and convey the kinds of really authentic, connecting stories that we all have and that we all share and that we all do. How do we get that to map in a place? Again, our end goal here for this particular project was the web, and so that's where my examples will come from. But certainly we can think about how this might apply across a variety of different outputs. And so, I don't want to pick on our own pages a whole lot, but this was something that sort of occurred throughout our research, where students would kind of point out these particular moments on some of our pages here, where we do a really good job of sort of framing, the importance of a degree. And again, this is from my world in professional technical writing. But I'll kind of read this, so bear with me. The highlighted area here, as a cardinal, you can feel confident in the focused attention you will receive from faculty and the real-world experience you will gain to apply to a career once you graduate. We are cardinals and we support your aspirations and endeavors. Your story starts when you apply. So this is really great in terms of, one of the things that we want to get students to do, particularly on the web, is move them towards that action. The challenge here, what many students pointed out, was that that content can be copied and pasted into any program or any place on campus. It didn't speak about authentic experiences and moments that would capture what it would be like to be in the PTW program. Show an example, one of our comparative analysis, we looked at Chiquita Community College, they're in Oregon. And again, we recognize that as a community college, their mission, their vision, and their prospective students are slightly different than ours. But one of the things that they do really well is right away on their homepage, they have these very particular personas. How do I connect with the people that go to Chiquita Community College? The skills upgrader, the student parent, the self-discoverer. They've got a whole host of them, the high school graduate, the international student, right? And suddenly I go to this page and I can see and I can connect with somebody just like me who's at this institution, who's learning things that I might be interested in, or telling their story about how they were able to achieve their goals. If you click on if I go back and click on the little pluses there, it sort of expands within the homepage to tell a little bit more about the individual story, and you can click on it and they've got an entire write-up as well as an embedded YouTube video of that person sharing their story. Those connections, right, they're really authentic. And they're coming from first-person experiences as people are sharing about how this institution, Chiquita Community College, helped them to achieve their goals and connecting that with whatever their sort of entry point was. These are the kinds of stories and experiences right, that catalog and connect with the sort of real world, active, full, context-rich experiences that the next generation of students is looking for. And so I'll turn it over to Blake, who kind of continue this thread on student values and these authentic experiences.
So what's really interesting as we look at this research is that way back in 2014, I did a research study that interviewed over 200 students. 100 were college students and 100 were high school students. And this is the Bill and Scott study. Both of these will be available for you for download if you're interested. You can look at these things. What we're seeing, if I can summarize this, is a shift away in interest of amenities and more of an interest in career development. And no, I'm not suggesting that SBSU become, a career-focused thing. Instead, I think if we embrace their interest in preparing for their careers, we can entice them to love learning for the sake of learning. But we have to embrace what their fears are and what they've lived through. They really, really are interested in career development. This is also supported by a national study. So we've looked at just regional data, but nationally, this pans out 100% as well. One thing I'd like to point out here is students prize project-based learning and undergraduate research that will hone crucial marketing skills for life after college. They're really looking for that return on investment, like so many of you mentioned. Other things that I felt that were very important from the study is that this generation values the relevance of this degree. They're skeptical of academic programs in general. Their number one reason is to get that job after the degree, and they want to avoid debt as much as possible, and they want services that give them a cutting edge so that when they're beyond college, they can stand above their peers and get those jobs. It's not surprising. What have they lived through? They've grown up in the Great Recession, meaning they've seen older siblings and friends go to college, take on a large amount of debts, and were not able to get jobs. They've also seen friends and families lose homes, cars, as they lost their jobs through the Great Recession. So it's not surprising, and it should be discouraging to us that they're so focused on career development. Again, if we embrace those interests, we can develop the type of students that really love learning for the sake of learning. So what kind of learning opportunities are we talking about? Well, the ones that are going across already on campus all over the place. As the more I learn about it, I think we're doing it. I really want to collect the stories so that we share these stories better. For example, if you're a potential student and you learn about what's going on in, say, engineering, you might be more willing to participate in that kind of extra beyond the classroom activity and choose SBSU. That's going to help SBSU as a whole. It'll help the student as a whole. It'll help the department. And if you have that interest and you're the one setting up those extra activities, if we market it, then we're going to bring in the right kind of students that you want for that. And no, I'm not asking anyone to sell the school. I think merely what we're saying is there's a lot going on that is underreported, and I'm not pointing any fingers in that. I'm just saying it's time to collect these stories. So let me share one example with you. So Brian Raymond, he was a graphic design major. He participated in Cardinal Solutions. As that student, among other things, he developed graphic user interface. He decided that this type of app development is what he wanted to do for a career. And he did a very good job with this project. Right now, you can see from his LinkedIn, sure enough, he's working as this graphic designer for Icon Interactive. They design apps in Michigan. What's interesting about his story to me is he got hired at the same time as another student from Eastern Michigan with the exact same degree. That student started out as an intern. This student started out as a full designer. That's 2 levels higher. What was the difference? They looked at his experience in Cardinal Solutions. They recognized he had solved these very problems for real clients before, and he was able to get that job. Much, the pay difference is amazing. That's years of experience that HR department gave him because of that. Now, that's the kind of story that's going to motivate a parent, motivate a potential student to consider this as a career. By the way, it's one of the highest paying careers in graphic design as well, paying on average over $100,000. So that's exciting. And so I think employers want us to develop these kind of soft skills. And in fact, the National Association of College Employers put out a survey where they asked businesses, what do you want in college graduates that they're not having right now? And the answer is leadership, teamwork, communication skills, both verbal and written, communication and strong ethic, initiative, flexibility. We're finding that just one example of that is Cardinal Solutions. As you're placed in a team, you're given responsibilities, and the only way you're going to complete those is to communicate well, work as a team well. But I'm very confident that there's other things going on campus as well, and if those stories were shared, then you're going to kind of attract the students that you want, because they're going to be excited about participating in the very things that you're leading, unique to your program. So what are the benefits of gathering this information? I think I've gone over that. I believe we can better serve potential students, we'll grow as a university, and we'll attract the type of students that we want. And it's all on these unique opportunities that go beyond the classroom that you're already engaging in right now. We need to collect those. So let's, with that, turn to workshop number 1.
So what we want to do here is think in terms of, as we've all been trying to celebrate, what are the things that are already going on in the institution that are authentic experiences? And let me come back. One of our original titles, or working titles for this, was Messy Pedagogies. Why? Because the kinds of things that we're talking about as authentic experiences often deal with messy problems. Every class that I teach is about information design, every class that I teach is about writing and communication and all of those different elements. And we begin with the premise that as soon as human beings are involved, and guess what that means, they're always involved, it's going to be a messy kind of problem, it's going to be a messy kind of project. Some of the things we do simulate, some of the things we do actively engage in those authentic experiences. So what we want to do is, we've got a couple of phases here for the conversation. And phase 1 is to begin with the wider approach, or the wider perspective rather. What does it mean to be a professional, a scholar, a researcher, an administrator in your role with the university? How does your experience, your interconnection, your interactions with students, prospective students, students who are here, and even our graduates and our alumni, how is it about problem solving? How is it about authentic experience? How is it about understanding the educational mission of the institution? So with that as kind of a big picture, how do we narrow that down and make that more applicable or approachable, or if we're going to ask you to think and jot down some ideas, what are we actually trying to explore there? So if you look at, do we have an example of it up here with us? I should have held on to a copy for myself. So the first one is the one that begins with what kind of problems does your discipline or profession study? What makes those problems interesting and challenging to people in your discipline or profession? Or another way of looking at that is what draws people into your field, discipline, or profession. And then finally, what methods or approaches does your discipline or profession apply to understand and address the problems that it engages with? So if the idea is identifying authentic experiences, this is a step or a stage in there. And some of these things are really obvious. We've already called attention to a bunch of examples. Some of these things might be less obvious. The key point there is, however, if it's obvious to anyone, it's obvious to you. It's not obvious to our prospective students. It's not obvious to the parents of those people. It may not even be obvious to those of us in the room looking across at everybody else. So part of it is educating ourselves about what we do and what's meaningful and how to connect with our prospective students and their families. But it also helps us connect with one another and understand how the interconnections of all of us as part of that educational mission for the entire institution, how we support one another, complement one another, and how the work that we do feeds one another's successes. So I'm going to highlight something. I just told Dr. Peretz that I was going to highlight something that he said. Because this is one of the goals, one of the things that I was hoping for. I overheard him say as I was walking by, that was a very important learning moment for me. So what he was doing in the conversation is reconnecting what we're talking about here with his own experience of emerging and becoming as a professional. And those are the kinds of things that we want to hold on to. Those are the kinds of things that we want to celebrate. I debated about asking the question about what to have you think about in a different way, and specifically by asking you to think about the moment where you first thought of yourself as a member of the profession that you have joined. What did that look like? What did that mean? How did that feel? And what was it? What knowledge suddenly came to be, or suddenly came into focus for you that allowed you to have that realization? Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And what we argue is that those experiences don't come from reading a textbook. It might help, but that's not the moment of learning. That's not that moment that we're talking about. It's Mark saying, that was a very important learning moment for me, and being able to look back on that and reflect upon that. That's amazing, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about doing. So briefly then, because like I said, we'll funnel and we'll channel and we'll keep going with this. What are some of the examples of things that you were talking about? There was a lot of amazing chatter. We can't really get to all of it, but what can we do to highlight it? Anybody? Yeah?
I wrote it down so I could say it correctly. In admissions, we seek to ascertain why our current students choose SVSU over our competitors. That tells us what we do better, what needs and goals we meet better than other institutions, or at least are perceived to meet better. And then we go out and identify other prospective students who have those same needs and those same goals. And then we communicate how and why we are the institution that better meets those needs and goals. Hopefully through more stories like the ones that we just saw today.
And I'll call attention to what are they focusing on there? People's experiences. It's not about how you did on a test. It's not about what learning came out of a specific class. In the world of admissions, they've got to be focused on expectations and needs and experiences and what's meaningful to the student. When do they think of themselves as a student for the first time? I push my students really hard in their introductory courses to stop thinking of themselves as students and to start thinking of themselves as developing professionals. Why? Because that's the next transformation that we're talking about. But here we are at the beginning of the process for many of them, and that's what they're emphasizing is that experience and how that is what creates the meaning for them. That's perfect. What else? Somebody else from somewhere? Yeah.
All right, so we're one of the SCNT tables, and we came up with a bunch of them that, we have diverse interests, but they have some common threads. So what we came up first was that, well, we study what we don't know and how to describe it in a way that's understandable. We find ourselves doing a lot of generalizing and looking for patterns. Like if it works for something, does it work for something kind of different? So there's some difference.
And both of those are elements that carry across every class. I'll stop there. I was going to say in SE&T. No, that carries across every class. Being able to recognize patterns and being able to, to think about how that stuff fits together. Remind me. Say again the first element that you came up with there.
We study what we don't know.
Yes. That's what I wanted to come back to. How often, as professors especially, those of us who are professors in the room, how often does somebody ask us a question where we may not have the best answer right there? What's the temptation? It's to maybe not give the fullest, most amazing answer, or to drift into speculation. Well, it's one of those things, thankfully, was hammered into me early on as an instructor. Admit your ignorance, embrace your ignorance, turn it into a learning experience for your students. Share with them that we explore things that we don't know. If we had all the answers, would we even bother to be doing what we're doing? No. All the fun in being a researcher is figuring out what we don't know and how to develop a more refined, develop understanding, period, and then to refine it as we go. Our students don't always see that from us. They don't always understand that that's the kind of thing that we are doing, that we are on a quest ourselves, and that we are seeking knowledge ourselves, and that we are building knowledge. We have plenty to share with them because we're further along in that pathway than they are. But if we build those authentic experiences for them and help them understand how they can build knowledge, they're following in our footsteps. But when we do it even better at a place like SVSU, where we've got so many undergraduate students and those are our research partners at times, or research assistants, we're on that journey with them. And that is huge. So again, it comes back to authentic experiences. And it comes back to that sense of getting them to invest and getting them to engage. And I'll come back to something that Blake said earlier when he was talking about, we might be looking at what's the return on investment. Am I going to be able to get a good job? Am I going to be able to pay back whatever debt I accumulate? That those are very real concerns, but it does not have to be at odds with what we think of as an authentic education or at odds with what we think of as valuable knowledge building. The more they invest in becoming learners and in those experiences, the more powerful their experiences are going to be once they leave us. They're going to be more valuable on the job market. They're going to have an easier time getting that return on investment themselves if we build in them the kinds of patterns and the kinds of habits that we are hearing from these examples that are coming out. That's the kind of stuff that we want to figure out, okay, how do we do that? How do we harness that? Where do we talk about it? That conveniently becomes the next phase, is when we begin to narrow this down, what bits and pieces of those stories, or what specific stories might we look at? So if you look at the other handout, what we're asking is that, so we've got 3 prompts here. You don't have time to respond to 3 prompts. So what we want you to do is talk amongst yourselves and then pick one of them yourself individually to jot some notes down for. So, Scott, you want to introduce these?
Yeah. So I'll go off script for a minute, and I want to highlight Brian Raymond's story again that Blake shared. Sort of being an example of what we're kind of looking for here. But Brian's story is really awesome because, not just because he was really great at graphic design and creating applications that were usable, functional, and desirable, but because Brian also recognized where are my knowledge gaps at? What don't I know? And so through his experience with Cardinal Solutions, he came to Bill and I, who again direct the Center for Experience Research and Design, aka the RW Usability Lab, and he said, I want to do some of this work too. This seems to be right in line with where I'm at in terms of thinking about app design, and I want to make sure that I'm not only designing nice interfaces, but that people can use the interfaces that I'm designing. And so it's moments like that when we think about Brian's story, it's those kind of moments where he recognizes as sort of where his knowledge gaps are, and those are in some ways not always celebrated moments, but they should be. So what we want to ask you guys here to do with this second workshop, the second writing prompt, is to think about one of these prompts here, describing a moment or an experience that celebrates your department, office, students, alumni, or colleagues. What are the cool things that are happening in your world? Or tell us about an opportunity in your curriculum, at large, or a specific course, perhaps an event or initiative that's happening through your office, something else, where students engage in problem solving or professional development. And how do you know Right? Where are those moments where you know this student has been successful in accomplishing what he or she set out to do? What does that look like? Or the third one here is describe an experience where a student was successful outside of the classroom, either through research, professional engagement, service learning, or some other activity that wasn't necessarily structured through our traditional courses, but was an opportunity that maybe we presented. So, Cardinal Solutions might be an example. Bill and I also directed the research team. Those exist extracurricularly. They're not part of our courses, but those are opportunities where students can engage in some real professional level, problem-solving, client-based activities. The one thing I think we heard the most as we were kind of making our rounds to some of the priority programs on campus over the summer was so many departments, so many programs have really rich, wonderful opportunities for students to engage in research. And so they would list, research opportunities for students as one of the things that we were looking to highlight. What I want us to do is kind of go beyond just saying we have research opportunities. What are those opportunities? Right? What are the kind of the sight, sound, smells, tastes, so to speak, of how students are engaging and what they're learning and what they're getting out of it? So I'll go ahead and start bringing us back together here as we start to wrap up the workshop and activities. I've shared on the screen here, it's a table from our usability report that we shared with Provost Hubley over the summer. And as Blake mentioned at the beginning, it will be available as a PDF download. It's an 88-page page turner. So what I want to highlight though is one of the things that we that we were thinking, that we proposed as we were structuring our web pages for individual programs, specifically highlights in several places here these wonderful, authentic stories about how students through our programs are making connections with their own professional identity, their own professional development, how they can see themselves being situated within a program of study at our institution. And I want to emphasize again that while this is sort of the outcome that we engage in with that project, certainly the things that we've generated here today aren't destined for just the web, or don't have to be destined for just the web. Then we can think about multiple places where we might share these stories on campus through social media, posters. I know there's some wonderful posters outside of alumni relations, for example. It's these kinds of stories, these kind of moments that I think are worth sharing. And so I kind of asked us to think about maybe 3 different places. I'm curious to hear, I kind of travel around and listen, but who's got some stories they want to share?
So what we just talked about, Health and Human Services, first off, our professions, all of us within the colleges, have really been uniquely placed in a point where all of us do field work experiences. So we actually go out into practice every day, and our students are actively working right by people who are going to become their peers. So that's one thing that we highlighted. Another thing is we have the university clinic, which I know had some work done with all of you. And so that also is a unique way that we integrated social work and occupational therapy and pharmacy. We don't have pharmacy here, but they have pharmacy and those kinds of things. And then finally, just wanted to highlight, and it's actually happening down the hall today, is MegaSim, which is a simulation experience within our college where we bring hundreds of students together and walk them through a scenario, and people learn professionally how they would work through that scenario. And so we bring all the students together to work in that environment or be in that environment. And so it's just a great way of learning.
So just in one college, all those different experiences, and there's the hands-on opportunities. And one of the things I really appreciate about this, about those examples, is we often we want to highlight maybe like the straight A students, and those are all wonderful stories too, but sometimes it's just, the students that do exceptional things, and aren't always maybe the top students too. And so we can think about a lot of different maybe stories of that, but who else has a story they want to share?
I've got one for the last one, describing experience for students successful. And it ties in really to the bottom two, the complementary minors and alternative majors, and then connected with that, your earlier point about what students are concerned about, which is the cost of their education. I think it's something that's really significant here at SVSU is, at least for students in APS, it's relatively easy to be a double major and finish in 4 years, which means you really get two skill sets which are complementary. And so this particular student, Hunter Cook, just emailed me this morning. He went to Michigan Academy last year to present a paper that he'd done, an undergraduate research paper that he'd done as an independent study with me. But I can take very little credit for it because he'd actually worked with Andrew Miller in geography, his other major, to develop all the skills of doing really sophisticated analysis of precinct level voting in the 96th House District. And when he presented it at the conference, the other faculty members were like, what graduate program are you going to? And they nominated it for best paper and won. So, but I think it's not about my program, it's about the way that this program fits in with other programs at the university and the way that the university is structured to be efficient. So,
And I'm glad you call attention to that, because sometimes those interconnections are the most powerful stories to share, because the students don't come in thinking of themselves as being, one thread. They think of themselves as walking out the door with a whole bunch of knowledge that's going to be useful to them, and where they acquire it is probably less significant than what they acquire. And that's an excellent story to support that.
And I think it also speaks to some of the threads that we were looking to create through our work, to find those moments where students can make connections across disciplines, across majors that they may not otherwise have been aware of prior to coming in. And PTW is a degree, for example, where students coming out of high school have very little knowledge of what it is, and that we even offer something like that at the college level. They're familiar with a lot of the traditional disciplines, but if we could think about ways where they might see connections between political science and PTW, for example, we do have a lot of students, believe it or not, that either major or minor or do some sort of complement of the two. We can start generating those kinds of connections across campus as well. Maybe time for one more story.
Thanks, everyone. I guess we were talking at our table. One of the classes that I love to teach is called Writing in Community Organizations. And of course, John was here and talked about how the last time I taught it, I had a handful of public history students that came through. They ended up doing a really interesting research project for the Council Museum focusing on cigar makers in Saginaw. And their research went into an exhibit. They ended up doing some usability testing on the website for the museum and making recommendations for the website.
I was actually a participant in that, which
It's
is a cool role reversal.
It was a really interesting project that I learned a lot, and they just ran with that project, worked with Tom Probably, and teaching into our class and do some presentations. It was a great opportunity to make those connections.
I was just going to say, with all of that stuff, one of our challenges as an institution is to think about how to take advantage of the energy and the intellect and the expertise and the ability, and let's throw out some more alliteration, all those things that are going to help us figure out not just what we do well, but what the entire institution does well. Again, to bring it back to that overarching mission of education. How is every one of us in our individual roles and responsibilities part of and contributing to the student experience of education at the university? Because when we recognize that that's what they are focused on themselves coming in the door, that's just the beginning of the conversation. The rest of the experience, once we've got them in our realm, once we've got them in our classes, in our offices, in the hallways, whatever the case may be, the rest of the experience comes with it. So instead of focusing on our own worlds and our own individual parts of it, we need to, at least at the beginning, think in terms of getting them here in the first place through all of these shared experiences and thinking about how we contribute And if we do that kind of thing, and if we figure out all the different ways that we can apply our own intellect to solving the problem of how do we get those stories out there, not just by the obvious means, but by all the means possible that we might think of, we create those connections. And then the beauty of it is they tell the stories. And it becomes not our responsibility to carry it on, it becomes their investment to carry it on. And that's when our program, PTW, took off initially and got to its biggest size that we ever hit. It was not because of faculty recruitment, it was because of students sharing the stories of what was going on in the programs. When they invest, our jobs become easier as far as all that kind of stuff goes. Blake?
So I just had a few thoughts. The Great Recession gave us a lot of challenges, didn't it? It's given us students that are really concerned about their careers and less concerned perhaps about learning, but we know that we can align learning with their careers and they'll turn on that love for learning. That's a great thing. It also brought us another challenge in that the state of Michigan has lost a lot of population. So not only are high school graduates lowering in number, but we've lost population due to the recession as well. That gives us another big challenge. So we have less students to recruit, and they're more concerned about careers. But guess what? From what we can see going across campus, you're doing things that are really going to help these students. The things going on right now are going to develop their careers, they're going to become outstanding students. The problem is, we don't know what those are. And when I talk about we, I want to look at it as a whole. I don't want to separate it to staff, faculty, etc. This is not about marketing. This is about, like Bill said, education. When those students embrace these roles and what they can learn for their future careers, the things they learn are amazing. And I just applaud all the things going on. Let's collect them. Let's gather them. So I'll be sharing a webpage link somehow with all of you that have attended, where you can download the Google Forms that Bill and Scott and their students have made to help you gather these things, and we'll share our research with you, etc. So, thank you.
Let me ask in connection with that, is there interest among all of you to see other people's stories if we can slowly get that stuff posted through this? Okay.
Bill, I wanted to ask a related question since we have so many departments represented. What are the challenges that departments or programs have in sharing those stories? Because obviously there are a lot of stories. So what are some challenges or barriers that are preventing us from sharing those stories? And where are those resources that programs can go?
That's an excellent question. How many times have all of us been in meetings where we talked about what's the biggest challenge? It's communication. It's among ourselves, but it's also outside of the university. And so when I say that's part of what I want us to be rising to is that challenge of communication. You know, we all have our networks and our connections. Our students bring them with them. You know, some of the times when they're on their cell phones, that's what they're doing, is they're connecting with the network that's outside of our classroom. You know, and sometimes it's a distraction, yeah, and sometimes it's a good thing because they're tapping into something that we want to be able to bring into our classrooms potentially. But at the same time, when we look at that, it's a moment that calls attention to the challenges. Am I getting through to that student? I'm not sure what's happening when they're looking at the phone. Now, have I made a connection? Have I not made a connection? Are they sharing that connection with somebody else? I mean, so one of the things I do in my own classes is to get people to integrate their cell phones into their professional development process. Actually, one of the research projects that my students are doing in the intro class this semester focuses on just that. How do you turn this into a professional device? But to bring it back to what you're talking about, in your question, it's, you know, we have access to social media. I don't think we don't use it as well as we could. You know, we have access to the web. We don't use it as well as we could. And that's not by any deficiency of anybody's ability or awareness or anything else. There's so many things that challenge us and that tear us away from staying on message or figuring out all the different ways that we can distribute that message. And that becomes a big part of the challenge. What are we going to add on?
I think one of the barriers that we have in our departments about sharing this information is the fear that we're going to make everybody required to do it. Yeah. And I think what David and Brian talked about earlier about this unified syllabus, I love the idea. But I think if many of us brought it up in our department, people would be resistant because now that means I have to revamp my entire course, now I got to integrate this assignment, now I have to put this over here, and it seems like a lot, but I like the idea of saying, you don't have to do that assignment. We want to make sure they do some sort of oral
Right.
presentation. We want to make sure that they do some sort of this, right? But I really think the fear is that people think this is going to create a whole lot of work for me.
Yes.
My hopes is that we would create a story database.
Yeah.
You can imagine that, like we have the photo database.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
And so if we do a story, say through the Reflections magazine, that's a longer story. But I'd love to see it just like the photos are, in small, medium, and large. And we could have the small as a snippet on our department page. We could have the medium-sized one, maybe in the news chat, and then maybe for Reflections, we'd have the longer one. So hopefully, and I believe UCOM is open to that idea, we can start gathering these and looking at the importance of stories and start breaking them down in these ways and organizing and structuring them.
I'm going to just offer an observation, and I'm hoping Scott will throw me a bone here with some information you shared earlier. When you showed us a slide about what's important to the students when they arrive, when they're selecting a school, when they're selecting a major, made all this sense, okay? I'm hoping that if you did a survey on the way out the door, some of those things would be rearranged and hopefully faculty would do that. And my understanding is that is very much the fact. Not only, I'm assuming that every single person in this room, the reason we're on a college campus on a Friday is because we had at least a few professors that changed our lives, that made a difference, that made an impact. And I would just, I'm hoping that's the case, and I'm not just being delusional, that the exit rankings would be somewhat different than the entry rankings.
And you know what though, Bob? That story is one that's worth sharing. A professor that changed your life and then puts you here.
Right.
You know, that you've had a career because of that. I mean, that's as good a story as any, and that's as authentic as any. So, I mean, that's part of what we got to be able to do, because that helps transform the narrative.
And it'd be great data to collect to do a project on sort of those exit surveys, those exit interviews, to kind of pose those same questions on your way out. What kinds of things have been the most important or beneficial to you during your time here? We didn't look at the specifics about why students chose what they did. We can speculate a little bit, and from my perspective, I think students know when they go to any university, there's going to be faculty there. The faculty are going to be trained experts, and it doesn't really matter who they are, right? It's not until they get here and we start cultivating personal relationship with them in the classroom, and we're able to help them grow and mature and develop their professional identity, that they see the value of those connections then, and again, that's not till they're in the door.
Sure. So I think, to answer your question about what are the challenges to sharing the story, I think there are kind of three challenges. The first challenge is the one that you're addressing here, which is what's a framework for sharing the stories in? Because otherwise they're just like lots of factoids. It's like, how do you communicate that to people? So I think my department went through this pilot program, and I thought it was a really helpful way to kind of, in this exercise, to kind of conceptually arrange those stories so that they have some purpose. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge, though, is making these stories authentic, because even then, it's easy to write down things when a third party looks at them, they sound kind of generic, right? So you need an editor to do that. And then the third part is, well, how do you actually get that story somewhere where other people can? And for a long time, that's been a real challenge. We can't update our web pages easily. We don't have a lot of control over who's going to do it. So that's sort of the time and access problem.
And it's so complex. I mean, we can contribute part of it, but then, we all need help to get it out there to all the different places where it might possibly connect.
I think that I would just add, I think that what's helpful about this is that it puts, so the stories are sort of going out as marketing stories. But that's not really our purpose here. Our purpose here is to think about how do those stories shape the way we teach and what our programs are about. And I think that you see it more clearly when you fill that out, if you get to that curriculum map. And then you're like, well, how does our curriculum actually support, these wonderful things that supposedly are happening? And then you start to ask more questions about that.
And The curriculum map was one of those places too, where students really wanted to see like that breakdown, right? They want to know, what am I going to take, when I'm going to take it, and I think it parties for planning purposes, but then it's also to see how things interact with each other. What's that experience going to be like? How do the courses build from one another?
Laura? Yeah.
So I just wanted to show, because earlier, Scott, you mentioned, and you showed the PTW site.
Yeah.
So if you want to pull up svsu.edu/PTW now, I think it'll give folks the opportunity to see the work that came out of the usability that you mentioned last summer. And it'll also give a good example of the stories, the core curriculum, the kind of visualization of putting together a page that more adequately represents and reflects all of the usability data. And it's showing that we listen to what they had to say. I wouldn't do it in a Google search. I'd type it right into the, it probably hasn't indexed yet, so just right behind the, denote PTW.
Oh, PTW?
Yeah. I mean, you could do graphic design too, that one's out there, but this'll show you from where we've come. So if anyone remembers the PTW example the last time where Scott had highlighted some information that came across in usability as being pretty generic that could be copied and pasted into just about every program. We have taken that in working with Cardinal Solutions and come up with a whole new look and feel in language so that we address the problems that came up in usability.
One of the things I'll highlight with this is that when we started off, we thought, oh, we're going to gather data for a couple weeks and it'll be nice and idyllic, and then we'll jump in and we'll start doing some redesign. It was we used the word messy before, we were joking, it's a gnarly problem. It was far more complex than we thought it was going to be, even though we went in thinking it was going to be complex. So the learning process there's a lot to learn. And I'll tell you that this represents movement in a very positive direction, that if we continue to do this kind of thing and build these kinds of pages for departments and for programs around the university, we will jump to the leading edge of what it means to promote programs, to communicate about programs, because when we look around the country, there are not a lot of people who get it. They're not doing data-driven design, and they're not really understanding that it's that tangible, authentic, creative, and concrete knowledge that people are looking for. So absolutely, celebrate that we got people who are pushing the university in the right direction here, who are in key positions to do so.
And I'll just point out, going back to that graph, that bar graph I showed earlier, with the top 3 things that students wanted, internship experience, labs and facilities, we highlight these, right? Where are the places students are going to get, every student in our programs is going to do an internship. We have a recording studio. We have one of only 2 usability labs in the state of Michigan. So, right, we're looking at making those connections to the students. What do they need? What do they value? And where can they find that in a program like this?
Thank you, Laura.